Grüezi ragazzi, willkommen e bienvenue to Cannabis Scienza's LinkedIn Live. Many more to come. To those of you joining us live, thank you very much for being here with us. And for those of you who will be checking in at a later time, also thank you to you for looking in. We hope that you enjoy it, and we hope that this session perhaps has entertained you and that you also have learned something during this time. Quick info about us. Cannabis Scienza aims to combat the bottlenecks of the medical cannabis industry using the power of education and through the training of healthcare professionals on the effective use of cannabinoid medicines. In doing so, increasing access to medical cannabis for patients worldwide. If you haven't already, please head over to the Cannabis Scienza LinkedIn page and hit that follow button. We appreciate every single one of you. And now to today's session. Today we will be discussing the importance of education in the field of medical cannabis. And joining me on today's stream is Adan De Salas, PhD neurobiology and a cannabis researcher for over 10 years, right, Adan? Perhaps you could
Yeah.
take a moment and introduce yourself. Thank you very much for joining us today. And yeah, maybe you can tell us a little bit about who Adan is.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Vijan, and the people from Cannabis Ciencia for inviting me. I'm biologist, and after my degree, I specialize in neurobiology, and I did a master degree in biochemistry, molecular biology, and biomedicine. And right afterwards, I started my PhD study. So I joined Manuel Guzman's group, which is a world leading research lab focused on different aspects of medical cannabis. So Manuel runs a big multidisciplinary lab in which there are two lines of research focused on the anti-tumoral action of cannabinoids, one studying breast cancer and another one glioma, which is a type of brain cancer. Then there is another line studying the neuroprotective effects of cannabis, of cannabinoids in neurodegenerative diseases, and another one in which we studied the role of the endocannabinoid system in the embryonic development, especially focused in the development of the brain, and how that could be involved in some diseases, and also assessing the potential impact of prenatal exposure to cannabinoids. So, and how I reached to this point, that's Adan, and let's say, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We touched on this before we went live, and you were just about to explain, I think. But
I was about to jump. Yes.
let's not put the cart in front of the horse here. But
Yeah.
I was wondering what is it really that because now you are not actively involved in research anymore, correct? And
Hmm.
if I'm not mistaken, it would be interesting to understand what made you decide to make that switch.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. So I decided to leave the classic academic career about a year ago, and I mean the reasons are numerous and diverse, but obviously there are some personal reasons that I somehow the day by day routine of a lab was something I wanted to change, and some other aspects of related to the how science is becoming. But especially, so I was pretty much related to the medical cannabis research field, but I realized that it was truly detached from the reality of patients, from the reality of people on the street, and I actually sought for larger impact of my time, of my energy, and my knowledge. So I decided to quit, and I noticed that there is a huge gap between the science of cannabis, the the clinical evidence that we have already, which is actually compelling clinical evidence in certain conditions. And so a gap between this evidence and science and the two big communities that should be actually educated and aware of this, which are, first of all, the general public or potential patients, and also the healthcare professionals, which are the ones that should be aware that they have a very powerful therapeutic tool, which is cannabis.
Yeah. Well, we had a call last week with some industry colleagues, if you will, from Germany. What one of them being a pharmacist, and it was interesting to see what some of the FAQs, if you will, are that she gets asked. Some of the frequently asked questions. I'm
Mhm.
curious, since you made this transition, what are some of the typical questions that you get, or topics that you get asked about?
About my transition, what do you
About
mean?
which topics people are more, or which questions people come to you with about cannabis.
Well, in generally, people have no idea about what cannabis is. I mean, we there is this label, no, like drug of abuse. In Spain, we only say drug, but I mean it's drug of abuse, and this is a big word that somehow influences deeply what anything surrounding cannabis. So I tried in any conversation, either if it's professional or personal, I try to educate and to spread the idea that cannabis it's been with us for at least 10,000 years. And I mean the relation between humans and cannabis, it's been quite tight and for different purposes. And it's only been a small gap of not even a century of obscurantism and stigma. So my main goal is trying to break down this stigma and educate and train. So
Yeah,
it's
and you're focusing specifically on education for medical purposes, like you mentioned, healthcare professionals and also the public, but primarily the healthcare
mhm.
professionals, or
Well, I do. So this I would say this is my main focus. So education and training. And obviously, when I was talking about this gap, my position was that I realized I was able to bridge this gap
Mhm.
because I could communicate the technical language that a healthcare professional would understand. But I love communicating, so I could also adapt for a more general population or general public. So I do different activities. So I collaborate with different educational platforms or companies specialize in training physicians. So, and I did different things for both North America or South America, also Central America, and some companies in Europe. And also I do specific, or I provide specific training for pharmacists. And this is something that I do abroad, but especially in Spain, because, well, perhaps we talk later about this, but medical cannabis hasn't been regulated still in Spain.
Yeah,
And so what we got here is CBD. And CBD, there are CBD containing products in pharmacies, but the pharmacist have no idea about what it is, which are the molecular basis underlying its potential, how they should work with it. Are there any interactions when with another drugs? Which are the evidences? And I try to do this. And of course, I also have done some videos or initiatives or created content for more general public. And also I'm projecting with other people a university course specialized in the biomedical basis of cannabis. I also work as consultant for different companies that want to develop clinical programs let's see, let's say with cannabis-based products, also here in Spain, because there are some companies that already got licensed. So yes, it's quite diverse, but yeah, cannabis
Yeah.
is at the core, definitely. Hmm.
Yeah. Because I can imagine in Spain you have a little bit of a unique situation in the sense that you have this kind of recreational situation without any kind of medical market established, right? And so I can imagine
Mhm.
that you probably get asked questions that are a little different than would come from the typical patient, right?
Yes, of course. And yeah. In Spain, I mean, there are many people that believe that cannabis has been regulated in Spain 10 years ago.
Hmm.
And but this is not the case. So not recreational, not medical. What we have in Spain is the situation of these cannabis smoking clubs.
Yeah.
And so they just found let's say a gray area in the law, and it's not legal, but it's not illegal
Yeah.
either. So, and there, these clubs have been for more than 10 years in Spain, and but it's true that 90% or more are strictly recreational. But so yes, the medical aspect of cannabis, I would say that in Spain, well, it is changing little by little, and especially with the CBD trend. But I would say that people get to this palliative care, and that's it.
Mm,
Yes.
yeah.
Hmm.
Now, you also mentioned a moment ago that you've been doing educational efforts in different countries all over the world, frankly, in Europe, South America, North America. It would be interesting to know, like, could you give us some perspective on some of the differences that you've observed, not only in, let's say, the readiness and the willingness of your audience to take in, what you're saying, but also maybe the different processes and the kind of different stages of awareness that they're at, and how those maybe contrast to each other.
Hmm. Well, I mean, I must say that I'm still a bit naive or new to this field. So I just started in this new adventure not even a year ago. But it's true that I work with different countries. And I would say, at least in Europe, mostly I work in Spain. So the main difference definitely is that in Spain, we don't talk about THC. So I work a lot and I talk a lot about CBD. And I try all the time, like, look, hey, there is also THC or cannabis. Let's talk about the plant, the entire plant. But obviously, in these South American countries that I work with, obviously we talk about cannabis, we talk about THC, but I found something I could already notice is there is a community, this is a medical community that it is they have more or less degree of awareness about or knowledge, but there are people with all that already has experience, let's say empirical experience. They have been working, they have been prescribing cannabis. Perhaps they don't fully understand which are the physiological basis of it, but they already have this. So there is a community that support to each other with the discussion of clinical cases and things like that. So I would
Yeah,
say that to me, and perhaps there are more developed or more visible educational platforms in American countries because also this regulation trend started years ago. So I believe it's also a matter of development. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, we as cannabisians are trying to be that. We're trying to be synonymous with cannabis education in Europe. So they may have a head
Hmm.
start over there in North America, but anyone here in Europe, if they think medical cannabis education, they should be thinking about us. And we're
Hmm.
also glad that you brought up a point. Um, we believe that. there's so much information that we could provide a healthcare professional, a practicing physician, someone considering to implement cannabis in a patient's therapy. But you talked about this community. I think that particularly in the field of medical cannabis, uh, harvesting that community between physicians is extremely important, particularly on this subject where we are still actively fighting against the stigma. And this actually brings me up to a recent scientific paper that was published. It's called "The Impact of Education on Attitudes Toward Medical Cannabis," and they conclude saying, and we had nothing to do with this. We will share the link in the comments. They conclude by saying that health education is an effective intervention to reduce stigma associated with medical cannabis. Future health policies must take a balanced, education focused, and proactive stance in reducing barriers to care that exist due to the negative stigma associated with cannabis use. Uh,
Mhm.
what do you think the role of education is really in this market at the moment and the stage that we are at? Because we've had this kind of green boom, and now we've kind of seen some stagnation in terms of markets and stuff. So what do you really think is the role in the big picture of education in the medical cannabis
Mhm.
industry?
Obviously, I mean, it's a critical aspect. So, as this paper suggests, no, I mean, there is a relation of trust between the doctors, the physicians, and the patients. So, if the doctor is educated and they are suggesting to use a new, well, new because it has millennia, but let's call it new therapy. Um, Patients tend to trust their doctors, and they then it's somehow easier to get to people. But of course, I mean, education is always critical in the when we talk about any newly developed drug. Education is the first stage because first of all, doctors or physicians need to understand what it is, how it works, and how I use it. And then they kind of start believing in this drug and they start using it. But in the particular case of cannabis, we are talking about a plant or some compounds, and they come with a huge stigma that we have talking about. So trying to break down the stigma and stop with all these prejudices around this is an extra work of education. But there are also other aspects which are important, and especially or particularly important in medical cannabis education. Is because cannabinoids, so the main active compounds of cannabis, are highly hydrophobic compounds. So they are lipophilic. And this, let's say, chemical nature makes them tricky compounds. So the way to work with these compounds is is tricky. Let's say they need to learn and to get some specific training. And also there's another aspect, and is the molecular target of cannabinoids, or at least the some of them, which is the so-called endocannabinoid system, which is our endogenous cell information, cell transduction of information system. And this is a very particular system that we all have, but the what is called the endocannabinoid system tone is not the same for all of us, nor for every one of us in different moments or contexts of our life. If it's a physiological context or a pathological context, this tone of endocannabinoid system changes. So we cannot prescribe cannabis as with other medicines that we choose a dose and uh, let's say a repetition or a number of doses, and we just prescribe it for the everybody. And no, and this is another very interesting aspect of medical cannabis that brings us towards a change of paradigm. And this is another thing that I like, because it moves towards a personalized medicine. So tailor-made prescriptions for every single case, which is difficult, I know, but I believe this is something really enriching for current medicine. And obviously all this requires technical and specific education.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you mentioned something very interesting there, which I think is a very important takeaway, is that there is no one size fits all for patients or indications or anything when it comes to cannabis. It is a really a very customized, tailored situation when it comes to a physician using cannabis within the therapy. Um, I wanted to ask you also, and you touched on some of this now, but let's say specifically when speaking with physicians that are interested in learning about cannabis and want to begin working with cannabis within their practice, what are some of the key aspects, if you will, that you would focus on with these physicians?
Hmm. Well, there is something that, yes, sometimes physicians get surprised, but I always tell them, bring patients to the front. So, and this is something that I believe the entire medical cannabis industry and field should integrate, and is bringing patients to the front. We should listen to them. We should learn from them, because there is something very curious that took place with cannabis, and is completely different to the traditional development of new drugs. So traditionally or classically, no, there is the development of a drug, and then it follows the preclinical research, followed by clinical research, and finally it gets to the pharmacies, or the doctors can start prescribing. No, but in this case with cannabis, patients have been using it for years, decades, and they got a lot of very useful information. So this is something we need to bring to the front. And sometimes it's curious, but medical cannabis, I mean, the preclinical research or clinical research is following empirical knowledge coming from patients. And so, yes, this is something interesting. And perhaps another aspect that I like to stress with physicians is the disruptive potential of cannabis as a medicine. Is something unbelievable. I mean, there is I would say there's no drug with such a potential impact, because, well, so it's not only for the opinions of many doctors and patients that are already using it, but it's, the every clinical study with cannabinoids, well, there are striking difference between each other, but for many reasons. But there is something which is consistent among all of them, and is robustly reproduced, which are the improvements of the quality of life. And this is something huge. And for instance, let's take the example of chronic pain. In Spain, it is estimated that there are around 8 million people, what is about out of 6 people in Spain that suffers from chronic pain. So, assuming that only one third, that is quite conservative, assuming that only one third of these chronic patients, chronic pain patients, would react to the treatment with medical cannabis. So we are talking of more than 2.5 million people that could see their lives severely improved for this. I mean, and this is just one condition and one country. So, I mean, this is entirely disruptive in medicine. So, yeah.
It seems like when it comes to cannabis, physicians need to be flexible in the sense that based on what you're saying, the dynamic between the patient and the physician changes a little bit. It's more of like
Yeah.
a journey together versus just let's say to use a metaphor, I guess, rather than the physician just giving the patient a map of how to get to the end goal, it's a journey they're taking together, which changes the whole dynamic of the
Yes.
communication, right?
Hmm.
And that's also another great point that you made, which is cannabis can treat the let's say primary symptoms, but it's important to always have a holistic perspective here. Okay, your pain is reduced, but what also does that mean for the rest of your life? Maybe you get to play more with your children, or you can now go biking again, which you haven't done in a long time. And I think this is kind of what you were hinting towards, also, that these things should be taken into consideration as well, right?
Definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah, many. Well,
awesome. I have one more question I wanted to ask you also, because you have this you've been in these different markets, you've speak with different audiences in your I'm sure very exciting year that it has been. um,
mhm.
but I wanted to ask you, uh, is it easier to teach the completely naive audience, let's say the completely inexperienced audience, or is it more interesting to teach? I think in cannabis you have more than with other medications. Let's say you have people that are knowledgeable or believe that they're knowledgeable. So I'm just
Haha.
curious, from your
I
experience,
get.
has that been like?
Yeah,
You know?
I get the point. So let's start that educating physicians ain't easy. I mean, they I mean, with all my respect, but they're a community that somehow tend to have a not small ego. But so this is first of all. But yes, I don't know if it's easier or harder.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I would say that most of them, but well, it's true that in some, there is one educational platform that I work with in Brazil, and I found physicians that are very interested. So they already got there with some degree of knowledge, and but they are pretty open to learning and not, yeah. But it's true that I found some healthcare professionals, and this happened with pharmacists, for instance, when they heard something, they have some idea, but it's pretty vague, and i I believe eventually the evidence prevails. So, and I really enjoy when I find certain resistance, when I see a physician or a pharmacist that has this stigma or prejudices very evident, and then is where I really do all my efforts trying to understand. And it's true that most of the times they end up telling me, how is that possible that we never heard about the endocannabinoid system? How is that possible that there were, I mean, evidences of the medical cannabis uses of 5,000 years ago, that there are Egyptian papyri that describe not only many uses and therapeutic applications, but also that it should be heated up in order to decarboxylate, when they had no idea about THC. They didn't have an idea about the acid forms, but they knew that should be heated up. And so they are really amazed when they understand, and they always are surprised why nobody knows nothing about this.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the best part of
I
the
think
job.
me personally, as someone that really loves learning about history, I think this is certainly a way that you can get me on the hook. You would have my attention, that's for sure. And
Hmm.
actually, the last point I would like to make is uh, I can speak for the whole team. We certainly wholeheartedly agree with you, and that's why a big part of our mission is making sure that healthcare professionals receive training and education on medical cannabis and the endocannabinoid system before they go out into the world and start working. We need the topic of the endocannabinoid system and medical cannabis to be a part of the healthcare curriculum. And as of
Definitely.
now, it is not yet. And so
Yeah.
I'm glad to be fighting this fight with you, Adan,
Yeah.
and bringing cannabis knowledge and education, to the people around the world. Thank you very, very much for joining us today. I'm sure
Thank
we
you very much
will
for
see each
inviting me.
other soon. And yeah, best of luck with everything that you've got going on, including
Cool.
anybody listening. Adan will be on the radio in Spain today.
Hey, it's true.
Thank you, Adan.
Okay. Thank you very much, Vision, and the people from of Cannabis Ciencia for inviting me. And yes, I mean, it's a very simple principle. There is a plant that can help millions of people, and we should ensure access to this plant and proper knowledge about its potential. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Adan.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have a
Ciao.
good night. Ciao.